Well, hello there. This is video number 6 in our series of videos entitled Losing Weight on the Carnivore Diet. And in today's video, we are particularly looking at the first 2 weeks of the carnivore diet. I'm reflecting back on some of my own memories of starting carnivore. Those first 2 weeks is a mixture of excitement and problems, and I remember it quite well. There is a real excitement because you've made one of the greatest decisions of your life to do something about your health and to actually make a start. It's huge and it's massive, and you shouldn't underestimate the significance of starting the carnivore diet. But those first 2 weeks can sometimes be filled with problems that we were not expecting or anticipating when we started the diet. Of course, how difficult those first 2 weeks will be is largely dependent upon what you were eating right before you started carnivore. If you're coming from a fairly healthy kind of keto-like diet, then you're probably going to be able to transition quite smoothly. But if you're coming direct to carnivore off, say, the standard Australian or the standard American diet, then it could be a rougher path for you because it is a dramatic change to the whole fuel system for your body. Some people in this situation might be better advised to start gradually and go through some sort of transition period. And I will leave a link in the description to a video I made recently specifically on that issue of transitioning. It also provides you a link to download a worksheet on choosing a right transition plan for you. But let me share with you some of the problems that you may well encounter in those early weeks on carnivore. People sometimes speak of these issues as the keto flu, it's sometimes called. It's your body adjusting to a radical change in diet. I've jotted down a few things here that I remember I experienced in those first 2 weeks. They're things like fatigue. I remember I was tired so much. I had very little energy, and I was a bit shocked because I was expecting to have more energy, but in fact I had less. I had a lot of headaches, I remember, and I had constipation fairly severely in those first couple of weeks. Not only that, but there's often cravings in those first 2 weeks for carbs and for sugar because both of those things are very addictive. And if you've previously been eating a lot of sugar or carbs, then there's a good chance that you're going to have some addiction issues. And overcoming that is just as serious and just as major as overcoming any addiction that you've had in the past. You may also experience insomnia, not being able to sleep or tossing and turning at night and laying awake, and maybe no doubt many things on your mind like the carnivore diet and what's happening to your body, and sleep becomes an issue. Then you've got a few practical issues to think about, like eating out at a restaurant or engaging socially with others, which invariably involves food, and that can place on you an added stress that you weren't expecting. And then there's the whole challenge of preparing food. You've cooked all your life with meat and vegetables and a number of sides, and quite often the meat or the protein was just one part of the dish, whereas on carnivore it's going to become the whole dish. Knowing how much to cook and getting used to just one ingredient on your plate, a big plate of meat, and that can be a challenge. So when you put all of these together, it can be quite a challenging time for many people, these first 2 weeks. They are important weeks, but here, let me give you some suggestions on practical things that you could do to help ease some of these problems. Again, I've just scribbled down a few that have come to mind and I found helpful when I started. The first thing is very practical, and that is to prepare your fridge and your pantry for your new way of eating. You need to get rid of all the temptations and all the foods that you ate before, and you need to stock your fridge and pantry with carnivore food, and that's going to make it a lot easier. Also on carnivore, you're only eating meat, and because you've only ever cooked meat as one part of the meal, the tendency is not to eat enough when you start carnivore. You need to eat enough to be comfortably full, and make sure you're eating fatty cuts of meat. The fat is going to help with the constipation. Another thing that's going to help in those early 2 weeks is staying hydrated. This cannot be overstated. The importance of hydration is huge on carnivore. Your body's going to need more water than it did before. getting dehydrated can cause all sorts of problems, so make sure you're drinking enough. And as I said earlier, when you're choosing your cuts of meat, choose the fatty cuts of meat. I know this goes against what you've always believed and been told for your entire life. I know this goes contrary to all the advice that you've had all throughout your life, that you shouldn't eat too much saturated fat. It's going to clog your arteries and give you a heart attack. We've got to get that thinking out of our minds because it just isn't true. We need to choose fatty cuts of meat, and not only choose fatty cuts of meat, but make sure we salt it generously. We need a good amount of salt on carnivore. This again goes contrary to what we've been told all our lives, that salt is bad for us. It's not. But get a good quality salt like Redmond salt. I will leave a link in the description to where you can get Redmond salt in Australia. And then there's a few suggestions of things that you might want to include in those first 2 weeks that are going to help with some of the issues that I mentioned earlier. Bone broth is really helpful. I made a video on how to make bone broth. It's very easy to make your own, and it's so much healthier than buying one in a supermarket. But bone broth is full of electrolytes. That's the sodium, the potassium, and the magnesium. All of those things are going to be so vital on a carnivore diet. Those same minerals are also found in things like eggs and organ meats. So it's a good idea to try and include those. Yes, you could try the organ meats, just learn how to cook them, and they can be quite delicious and they're so good for you. Really, I think perhaps the most important key is just to keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't overcomplicate your meals. Keep your meals simple. Just eat plenty of good fatty meat, salt it properly, and enjoy it. It is so satiating and delicious, and it's going to really nourish you on the carnivore diet. You may also find it helpful to add electrolyte drinks to your diet. These can be bought at pharmacies and sometimes in supermarkets, although you have to read the labels carefully because they're very prone to put sugar in them. Now, if you missed the last video on the whole issue of scales, particularly in those first 2 weeks, you need to go back and watch that because you need to stay off the bathroom scale during the first 2 weeks because that is such a deceptive number and going to cause you all sorts of problems. If you missed that, make sure you go back and watch it because it was an important video to watch. And on that video, I gave you 5 other things that you should measure other than your weight, particularly in those early days on carnivore. And look, the last thing I want to say, and I've said this many times, but this is just so important, and that is to find your tribe. Find some support. Find a community of carnivores. Join our Facebook community, the Carnivore Pensioner. The bottom line is that you need to look for and find other carnivores. But it is so important to find some support. Carnivore is so much easier if you do it with others. Don't go it alone. So join our Facebook group, find your tribe, link up with other carnivores. In our next video, we're going to tackle the whole topic of cravings on the carnivore diet. So the next video will deal with some practical tips and suggestions for overcoming those cravings. So that will be video number 7. I do want to thank you for watching today. I will see you on the next video when we're talking about cravings. And until then, keep telling your story.